The sunset painted the Colorado prairie in shades of gold and amber as Nora Newman stared at the horizon, the same horizon that had swallowed her husband John 3 months ago. The wooden porch beneath her feet creaked, much like her spirit, worn and weathered by broken promises and abandonment. The year was 1875, and life on the frontier was as unforgiving as the man who had left her with nothing but a failing ranch and fading memories. "He ain't coming back," she whispered to herself, the words carried away by the evening breeze. The small ranch house stood lonely against the backdrop of the Rocky Mountains. 20 acres of land, a dozen cattle, and a mortgage that grew heavier with each passing day. At 25, Nora had already lived a lifetime of hardship. When John had ridden off after their argument, she'd believed he'd return once his temper cooled. But days turned to weeks, weeks to months, and the truth settled in her bones like winter frost. Her husband had ridden off and never looked back. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention. Riders approached from the east, silhouetted against the dimming light. Nora reached for the rifle she kept propped against the doorframe, her heart quickening. Living alone had taught her caution. 3 men on horseback slowed as they neared the ranch house. The leader, a broad-shouldered man with a black Stetson, raised his hand in greeting. "Evening, madam," he called out. "Apologies for the intrusion. Name's Samuel Quinn. These are my trail hands, Tom and Elliot. We're moving cattle north to Wyoming and wondered if we might water our horses at your creek." Nora kept the rifle visible but lowered it slightly. "Water's free for travelers. Creek's behind the barn." Samuel nodded his thanks, his eyes lingering on her face before he led his companions toward the creek. Nora watched them go, studying the man who'd introduced himself. Something about his steady gaze and the respectful tip of his hat reminded her of a different time, when she still believed in the goodness of men. After watering their horses, the cowboys prepared to leave. But Samuel Quinn hesitated, turning his mount back toward the house. "Madam," he called, "couldn't help but notice your north fence is down. Storm damage." Nora stiffened. "What of it? We've got time before sundown. Might be we could mend it for you." Pride warred with practicality. The fence had been broken for weeks, and she'd been losing precious time trying to keep the cattle from wandering. Still, accepting help from strangers wasn't something she did lightly. "I can pay with a hot meal," she offered finally. "Nothing more." Samuel's face softened into a smile that reached his eyes. "A hot meal's more than fair." The men worked efficiently, and by dusk, the fence stood repaired. Nora found herself in the unfamiliar position of cooking for men again. The kitchen filled with the smell of stew and fresh bread she'd baked that morning. Over dinner, she learned that Samuel Quinn had been a rancher in Texas before the war, had fought for the Union, and now worked as a trail boss moving cattle north. His companions were younger, drawn to the cowboy life for adventure more than livelihood. "What about you, Mrs. Newman?" Samuel asked, his deep voice thoughtful. "Running this place alone must be challenging." Nora's hand stilled on her spoon. "My husband's away on business," she lied, the words bitter on her tongue. A flicker in Samuel's eyes told her he knew better, but he simply nodded. "Well, if you need any help before he returns, we'll be passing back through in about 3 weeks." After dinner, the men prepared to leave, needing to make camp with their herd a few miles north. At the doorway, Samuel paused. "Mrs. Newman, forgive my forwardness, but I've been trailing cattle for 15 years. I know when something's been abandoned." His eyes met hers, steady and kind. "If you need help when we return, just ask." With that, he was gone, leaving Nora standing in the doorway, unsure whether to feel insulted by his perception or grateful for his offer. The following weeks brought new challenges. A mountain lion killed 2 of her cattle, A summer storm damaged the roof of the barn, and the well pump broke. Nora tackled each problem with grim determination, but exhaustion dogged her steps. At night, alone in the bed she once shared with John, she allowed herself moments of doubt and fear. When the familiar sound of cattle and horses approached one afternoon, Nora was on the roof of the barn, attempting repairs with salvaged wood and too few nails. She watched as Samuel Quinn separated from the smaller herd they were driving back south, approaching the ranch with the same measured pace as before. "Roof trouble," he called up, shading his eyes against the sun. "Just a small leak," she replied, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Mind if I take a look? Roofing was my father's trade." Before she could answer, he had dismounted and was climbing the ladder she'd propped against the barn. His assessment was quick and professional. "You'll need proper shingles and tar," he said. "This patching won't last the next rain." "I'm aware," Nora replied stiffly. "I'll get to town when I can." Samuel studied her for a moment, then nodded. "My men and I are done with this drive. I could ride to town for supplies, help you fix it properly." "Why would you do that?" Nora asked, suspicion edging her voice. "Because it needs doing," he said simply. "And because I reckon you've had enough people riding away when you needed them to stay." His words struck her like a physical blow. For a moment she couldn't speak, couldn't breathe past the lump in her throat. Then anger flared, hot and protective. "You don't know anything about me or my situation, Mr. Quinn." "I know enough," he replied quietly. "I know what it looks like when someone's fighting to hold onto something all alone." They stood on the roof, the summer sun beating down, a battle of wills and pride hanging between them. "My men can continue south," Samuel continued. "I can stay, help with the repairs you need, then be on my way." "And what would you want in return?" Nora asked, her voice hard with implication. Samuel's expression darkened. "Nothing you're thinking, Mrs. Newman." "My mother raised me better than that." Shame colored her cheeks. "I apologize. That was uncalled for." He nodded, accepting her apology. "1 week. I'll help get your place ready for winter, then ride on. You'll never have to see me again." Nora looked around at her failing ranch, at the repairs that loomed beyond her capabilities. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. 1 week, she agreed. Samuel Quinn proved to be a man of his word. After sending his men ahead with the cattle, he rode to town for supplies and returned with everything needed for the roof, plus additional lumber, tools, and provisions she hadn't asked for. "Consider it payment for room and board," he said when she protested. The roof was repaired in 2 days. The broken pump took another. By the 4th day, they had established a routine working from sunrise until late afternoon, sharing meals and sitting on the porch in the evening coolness, talking about everything and nothing. Nora learned that Samuel was 33, had never married, and had lost his family ranch during the war. He spoke of places she'd only heard of: Santa Fe, Dodge City, Cheyenne, and adventures that made her own life seem small and contained. On the 5th day, as they mended fences together, Nora finally spoke of John. "He wasn't always so restless," she said, hammering a nail with more force than necessary. "When we married, he had dreams of building something here. But the winters were harder than he expected, and the profits slower to come." Samuel listened, offering no judgment as she explained how John had grown increasingly bitter, how the arguments had escalated, and how, after a particularly vicious fight about selling the ranch, he had ridden away. "The last thing he said was that I was a fool for wanting to stay, that this land would break me just as it had broken him." Nora's voice caught. "Sometimes I think he was right." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "Land doesn't break people," he finally said. "Fear does. Fear of failure, fear of being trapped. Your husband was afraid, but he confused the land with his fear. And you, Nora asked. What are you afraid of? Samuel Quinn, his eyes, the color of the sky after a storm, met hers. Lately, I'm afraid of riding away when everything in me wants to stay. The confession hung between them, as tangible as the fence they were building. Nora turned away, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and something dangerously close to hope. You promised 1 week, she reminded him, her voice unsteady. I did, he agreed. But I never said I couldn't come back. That night, Nora couldn't sleep. Samuel's words echoed in her mind, along with the memory of his hands, strong and capable, working alongside hers. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine a future different from the lonely struggle she'd resigned herself to. The 6th day brought a change in weather and in mood. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and by midday, the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. They hurried to secure the livestock and equipment, racing the storm that rolled across the prairie with frightening speed. In the barn, soaked to the skin, they stood catching their breath as thunder shook the newly repaired roof. Lightning flashed, illuminating Samuel's face, so close to hers that Nora could see droplets of rain clinging to his eyelashes. Your roof's holding, he said, his voice low. Yes, she whispered, aware suddenly of how alone they were, how the world had narrowed to just this moment, this man. Samuel reached out slowly, giving her time to step away, and brushed a strand of wet hair from her face. His touch lingered, gentle against her cheek. Nora, he said, her name a question and a plea. The kiss, when it came, was as natural as breathing. His lips, warm against hers, asked rather than demanded. Nora answered with the hunger of someone who had been starving without realizing it. For a moment, the storm outside matched the one within her, wild, uncontrolled, and exhilarating. Then reality crashed back. Nora stepped away, her hand flying to her mouth. I'm still married, she said, the words a cold reminder. Samuel's expression tightened with regret. I know, I shouldn't have. No, she interrupted. I wanted you to, that's what frightens me. The rain continued through the night and into the morning of the 7th day. They moved around each other cautiously, the kiss unacknowledged but ever present in the spaces between their words. As the sun finally broke through the clouds, Samuel packed his saddlebags. The week was over, his promise fulfilled. Nora watched him prepare to leave, a hollowness expanding in her chest. You've been more than generous with your time, she said formally, as if they were mere acquaintances. The ranch is in much better shape thanks to you. Samuel secured his bedroll to his saddle before turning to face her. I meant what I said about coming back. I can't ask that of you. You're not asking, I'm offering. He took a step closer. I'll be honest, Nora, I've never met anyone like you. This week has meant more to me than you know. It's been lonely, she admitted. Having you here, it reminded me that I'm still alive. You're more than alive, he said fiercely. You're the strongest person I've ever met. Most would have given up this place months ago. Nora looked around at the ranch, at the land that had become both her burden and her anchor. It's all I have left. It doesn't have to be. The implication of his words hung between them. Samuel mounted his horse, looking down at her with an expression that made her heart race. I have business in Denver, he said. It'll take about a month. When I come back through, I'll stop by. If you want me to keep riding, just say the word. If not. He trailed off, leaving the possibility open. Samuel, Nora began, uncertain what she wanted to say. He smiled, the expression warming his weathered face. I'll stay till you believe I won't leave, however long that takes. With that promise, he rode away, not looking back as his figure grew smaller against the vast Colorado sky. Unlike John's departure, this one felt like a beginning rather than an end. The month that followed was both the longest and shortest of Nora's life. She threw herself into work, using the skills Samuel had taught her to make further improvements to the ranch. The roof held through 3 more storms, the fences kept the cattle secure, and for the first time since John left, Nora began to feel a sense of accomplishment rather than mere survival. She also began to acknowledge the truth that had been growing within her. Her marriage had been over long before John rode away. What remained was only legal, not emotional. The realization brought both sadness and relief. One evening, as summer gave way to early autumn, Nora sat on the porch watching the sunset. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her heart leap. She stood, shading her eyes against the dying sun, hoping yet afraid to hope. Samuel Quinn rode into the yard, his horse moving at an unhurried pace. He looked the same, yet somehow different. Perhaps it was the way he smiled when he saw her, as if returning to this small ranch was coming home after a long journey. "You came back," Nora said as he dismounted. "I said I would." He removed his hat, holding it respectfully. "The question is, do you want me to stay?" Nora had rehearsed this moment countless times, weighing duty against desire, past against future. But standing before him now, the answer was simpler than she had imagined. "I need to tell you something first," she said. "I've filed for divorce. It won't be final for some time, but I've made my decision." Samuel's expression remained careful. Because of me," she corrected. "Because I deserve more than waiting for someone who chose to leave." He nodded, understanding the importance of her choice. "And now?" "Now," Nora said, taking a deep breath, "I'd like you to stay. Not forever, not yet, but for a while longer." Samuel's smile broke through like sunshine. "A while longer sounds just fine." Samuel stayed through the autumn harvest, helping Nora bring in the small crop of wheat she'd planted in the spring. They worked side by side, their bodies finding a natural rhythm together. At night, they sat before the fire, talking of their pasts and increasingly of possible futures. "I've been thinking," Samuel said one evening in late October, "about settling down." Nora looked up from her mending. "Have you? This life, moving cattle from place to place, never putting down roots, it suited me after the war. I needed the movement, the freedom." He stared into the fire. "But lately, I've been wondering what it would be like to build something lasting again." "It's hard work," Nora said softly, "as you've seen." "Yes, but worthy work." His eyes met hers, "especially with the right partner." The implications hung in the air, unspoken but understood. They were still navigating the complex territory between friendship and something deeper, both aware of the barriers that remained. November brought the first snow, and news from town John Newman had been seen in Santa Fe, reportedly planning to travel to California with a woman he'd met there. The information came via letter from the lawyer handling Nora's divorce petition. "Are you all right?" Samuel asked, finding her staring at the letter in the kitchen. "Yes," she said, surprised to find it was true. "It's strange, I thought I would feel something more. Anger, perhaps, or hurt. But all I feel is free." That night, with snow falling softly outside, Nora made her decision. She went to Samuel's room, formerly the spare bedroom, and knocked gently. He opened the door, surprise registering on his face at finding her there in her nightdress and robe. "Nora." "I'm tired of waiting," she said simply. "For the divorce to be final, for society's approval, for certainties that may never come. Life is too short and too precious." Samuel's expression softened as he understood. He reached for her hand, drawing her into his room and closing the door behind them. Their coming together was tender at first, then passionate as months of restraint gave way to desire. In his arms, Nora rediscovered parts of herself she had thought lost forever: her capacity for joy, for abandon, for love without fear. Afterward, Lying in the quiet darkness with Samuel's heartbeat steady beneath her ear, Nora felt a peace she hadn't known since childhood. "I love you," Samuel whispered into her hair. "I think I have since that first day on your roof." Nora lifted her head to look at him, his features shadowed in the dim light. "I love you too," she replied, the words feeling both new and as if she'd been saying them all her life. Winter settled over the ranch, blanketing the land in white stillness. Samuel and Nora established new routines, working together through the short days and spending the long nights planning for spring. The divorce papers arrived in January 1876, granting Nora her freedom and the sole ownership of the ranch. "We should celebrate," Samuel said, producing a bottle of wine he'd been saving for the occasion. "To new beginnings," Nora toasted, the firelight catching the amber highlights in her hair. "And to the question I've been waiting to ask," Samuel replied, setting down his glass and kneeling before her. From his pocket, he withdrew a simple gold band. "Nora Newman, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears blurred her vision as Nora nodded. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Samuel Quinn, I will marry you." They were wed in early March as the first hints of green began to appear in the meadows. The ceremony was small. A few neighbors, the minister from town, and Samuel's former trail hands who rode in for the occasion. Standing before the minister in a dress of pale blue, Nora looked into Samuel's eyes and felt the last of her doubts melt away. This was a man who had proven his word, who had stayed when it would have been easier to leave, who had rebuilt not just her ranch but her faith in love. "I, Samuel, take thee, Nora, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he vowed, his voice steady and true. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." When Nora repeated the same vows, they were not just words but promises she believed in with her whole heart. Their first year together brought challenges and triumphs. They expanded the ranch, buying neighboring land when it became available. Samuel's knowledge of cattle breeding improved their small herd, while Nora's garden flourished under her careful attention. In December, as snow again blanketed the land, Nora shared news that brought tears of joy to Samuel's eyes. They would be welcoming a child in the summer. "A son or daughter," Samuel marveled, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Our family growing on this land we love." "Are you happy?" Nora asked, watching his face. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he answered truthfully. "When I rode onto this ranch that first day, I was just a drifter looking for water for my horses. I never imagined I'd find home. And I never imagined that after being abandoned, I could trust someone enough to love again," Nora said. "You taught me that, Samuel Quinn. You showed me what it means when someone stays." Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the tracks of the past and preparing the ground for new growth. Inside, warmed by the fire and each other, Nora and Samuel held onto the life they had built together, a life founded not on fleeting passion or convenient promises, but on the steady commitment of two people who had chosen, day after day, to remain. Their daughter, Emily, was born in July 1877, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. She grew up running through meadows that had once seemed lonely to Nora, but now echoed with laughter and love. 2 years later, they welcomed a son, William, completing their family. The Quinn Ranch prospered, becoming known throughout the territory for its fine cattle and the hospitality of its owners. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings after the children were asleep, Nora would sit on the porch with Samuel, their hands linked as they watched the stars appear over the land they had nurtured together. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that day?" she would ask. And Samuel, with the certainty that had first drawn her to him, would always answer the same way. I believe we would have found each other somehow. Some things are just meant to be. In those moments, Nora knew that the greatest journey of her life had not been to this remote Colorado ranch, but to the heart of the man beside her, the man who had promised to stay until she believed he wouldn't leave, and who had kept that promise through all the seasons of their lives together.